Well, Joe Biden may have secured the presidency, but the fight continues in a deeply divided Senate and House of Representatives. Democrats remain in control of the House. However, they lost 5 seats and could potentially lose more as votes continue to be counted. Meanwhile, Republicans are poised to keep the Senate, but that won't be official until January and some other upcoming elections in Georgia. So for more on all of this, we're going to dig in with CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed's joining us from Times Square, our election headquarters there, where he hasn't had a break at all. Ed, President-elect Biden is set to take the helm of a divided nation with a Congress that has struggled to find common ground on things as basic as COVID relief, where Americans of all stripes are suffering. You've covered this election from the get-go. Give us a sense of the political landscape that Biden is walking into and how that affects his ability to get things done.
Well, it's still pretty early, Lana, but it has the potential to really squander a lot of the hope that Democrats had about being able to do big things pretty quickly and boldly in the new year. We'll have to wait and see whether during this lame duck period there is any attempt by the White House and the current Congress to put together some kind of a COVID relief package, even if it's just a short-term one, and then allow the next president to potentially enact another. But the dynamics will change come January 3rd, when the new Congress takes over, and then January 20th, when the new president is inaugurated. And, you know, we'll have to wait for those results in Georgia to give us a better sense and maybe sort of a refresh of where the nation's political dynamics really are. We've never had 2 major special elections in the same state at the same time, with, you know, literally the balance of power hanging hanging out there to be decided by just a few million people in one state. So the stakes are going to be pretty incredible, and I think we just have to wait and see to what extent that influences the policymaking. But we know that Biden has said he wants to work on COVID relief. He wants to put the United States back inside the Paris Agreement regarding climate change. He wants to talk about and figure out a new big economic stimulus, perhaps an infrastructure plan that has been put off for so long, and that members of both parties say they'd like to enact. And then there's going to be a host of things he has to do in terms of national security and foreign policy that to some extent require congressional engagement as well. So he is inheriting an awfully big responsibility, and one that's fraught given the nation's politics.
Absolutely. Well, and to that point, it's not just a partisan divide that exists there in Washington, D.C., but there's also a split within House Democrats about the direction of their party. That's something that Biden, as a moderate Democrat, has tried to thread the needle, at least during the election process. But now some of these questions are going to be posed, I think, more directly to him. So how might Biden begin to bring these different types of Democrats together?
Really interesting question. We don't know the answer to that yet either, but he's going to face tremendous pressure from liberals in the party, not just in the House, but in the Senate as well, to make some fundamental institutional changes. Should the filibuster be blown up if Democrats get control of the Senate? Should he be nominating people who have corporate backgrounds to positions at federal agencies, either as cabinet secretaries or in other senior positions? To what extent do you go after health care reform in a way that looks more like Medicare for all versus his what he calls Biden care plan? What do you do about climate change, and to what extent? He is somebody who's always more interested in finding a middle ground and doesn't have a problem working with Republicans. That is something that many in his party are not used to and don't want to do. But as he said to Norah O'Donnell in their recent 60 Minutes interview, as he has said publicly at other times, he won the primary. He is now the leader of the party, and he's going to have to somehow lead the party through the next few years and those conversations that they're undoubtedly going to have. And, you know, the other dynamic that we haven't had in a while, Lana, there's a very good possibility, given his age, that he's a one-term president. So at what point does the party start to look beyond him? When does he signal that, if at all? And how does that affect his ability to govern and keep the party together? Will they at some point not necessarily turn their backs on him, but pay less attention to him if they're already thinking about 2024 and beyond? And again, we have no reason to think, gosh, the guy hasn't even been sworn in yet, that he is or isn't thinking about a second term, but that has been hanging out there and probably will be pretty quickly into the beginning of his term.
Yeah, and some people might think that you're premature to be bringing that up, but you and I both know in politics that people are already thinking about that, and also thinking about the role that that Vice President-elect Kamala Harris is going to have in this administration. I do want to talk a little bit more about Georgia, because that Senate question is going to be a huge one in determining what Biden is able to accomplish. And Democrats currently need at least 2 seats to win back control of the Senate. Georgia is the decider. 2 seats there to battle. The voter registration deadline in Georgia, if people haven't registered to vote yet, is in December. But if Republicans keep control there, I want to hear how you think that might change the way that Joe Biden attempts to govern. And I also want to hear from you in terms of what you think about those 2 Senate races. The fact that they're actually even up for grabs potentially for Democrats would be, in a different election cycle, a huge headline. But tell our viewers, because they are so important, where things stand in Georgia.
Sure. David Perdue is the Republican senator who looked like he might eke out a win and get about 50%. But as the ballots kept coming in, he slipped below 50%. And the rule in Georgia is you have to go to a runoff if nobody hits 50%. So he faces Democrat Jon Ossoff, who has been, frankly, pretty good at raising money outside of his state in recent years. He was a special election candidate for a House seat a few years back and was able to raise something like $40 million for a race that didn't cost that much. And he was able to do it again and nearly knocked off Perdue in this contest. Now with the field cleared of all the others, it'll just be the 2 of them. And it's likely to be another jump ball. And in the case of Perdue, do you hew to the Trump-style Republican politics that probably helped you get to the position you were in? Or do you start adapting with the rest of your party to the realities of the future? The president is still president. His family is still quite influential over the Republican Party. And it'll be an interesting gauge to see whether he and the other Republican in the other race have to rely on the Trump operation for turnout. The other race includes the incumbent Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, who was appointed late last year when the Senator Johnny Isakson retired for health reasons. Loeffler, not that well known in the state, but was seen as somebody who could help diversify Senate Republican ranks as a woman, as a corporate executive. There were calls in the state to go with a more conservative pick, a guy named Doug Collins, who came in 3rd in a 21-way race for that seat. Ultimately, the Democrat Raphael Warnock prevailed, but again, he didn't hit 50% either. So it'll be Raphael Warnock versus Kelly Loeffler. When you add up all the Democrats that were in that race, plus all the Republicans that were in that race, you got to almost essentially 50-50, just as you did in the other race. So this is going to be an incredible project for both Republicans and Democrats to turn out people just a few days after Christmas and the New Year to vote in a special election, 2 of them, and 2 that will have incredible stakes for the rest of the country. So that national and maybe even international attention on what otherwise might have been a sleepy and inconsequential race, at least outside the state, is going to put tremendous pressure on a state that has had quite its share of politics the last few years, and has become a great big focus for Democrats, especially believing that those kinds of states in the South are the ones they can start winning in the future.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you.